on a mission to really change the way we approach wellness so we can focus more on people's resilience and turn that into thriving as opposed to keep trying to come up with ways to address illness. Well, what if we focus on wellness instead of illness? And so a lot of my work centers around that. And so tonight I want to share with you some ways that I've sort of come into that work and moved through that work. So, and I think it's important because one of the things that I want us to do as we continue to prepare ourselves for the healthcare profession is really to see ourselves as change agents, not just changing, not just supporting people when they're in front of us, but if we are really to be the people who understand how brains work, how minds work, how we can move about in the world, then hopefully we will reserve some of that for actually just changing some piece of the world, not just individualizing. We can't get to enough people fast enough if we go one-on-one for the rest of our lives. Wish we could, we can't. So that's kind of where I'm going tonight. So we already got to that piece. You can go home again. I'm home. Rogue Scholar is my stage name. So, and one of my poet colleagues, and UCCS, I don't know what you say. Do they give you a title? They just say go teach. They didn't give you a title.
I am an alumna.
So I just want to thank Michael for coming. I mentioned him because we've done a lot. He knows Rogue Scholar better than anyone in here. So it's important that I recognize him for that and for his attendance and coming here. I appreciate that. So thank you for allowing me to come home again. All right, on becoming, we already went over that stuff. What I want to focus on though is the two models of wellness that I'm going to just talk about a little bit tonight, and then maybe we'll see where the conversation goes. But that I want you to have an understanding when I talk about the book and the healing journey, what it's all connected to. It's not just a book, it's a work and decades of work. So, okay. So the first model that I want to talk about is the living openly model of advocacy and support. And I've written about this in informal ways, but I've been practicing it for the last 10 years in my work with adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. In 2010, I developed the first nonprofit organization for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. There was two things unique about this organization. One is that it focused particularly solely on adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. So we didn't address issues of adults who had sexual violence occur for the first time after 18. We focused only on adults who had an occurrence of sexual victimization before the age of 18. No other organization does that. There was none. So adult survivors trying to explain to people that they were having PTSD triggers and calling up RAIN or some other organizations, they're going, what? What was this? You would have pressed charges? Like, no, it was really difficult to understand that. The other thing that was, so that was one, is that we focus only on adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. The other piece about that was that it was the only organization that advocated for adult survivors to live openly as a healing model. Now, interestingly, I have a lot, and it was an online organization. So nothing we ever did was private. There was no secrets. It was open online. When we did a conference, they were open conferences. And when I told my colleagues about this, they were, of course, like, you can't do this. Is 2010. You can't do this. How will people know? That's the whole point. And what I discovered in my whole healing journey, that at that time had only been 3 years, was either we're healing or we're hiding. But we can't be in our therapist office helping people hide their pain and keeping them and only being their secret keepers. Our roles have to expand beyond secret keepers as helpers, right? And so now the interesting piece about that living openly is that it was an invitation, not a demand. And so what we found over the years and working with adult survivors is that people move into an invitation. It's not an all or nothing. Even for me, coming to live openly as a survivor, it's not an all or nothing. There's no flags. We didn't have pins or anything like that. It was about dropping the secret. What does it look like or feel like when you drop the secret? That doesn't mean you run out and tell people. What it does mean is that you don't shy away and figure out 10 things to get out of the conversation or leave the room or not take care of yourself, right? If you have to say, I think that's a little bit different if you happen to be an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and you allow the conversations to happen as they happen. So one of the things, for example, that became interesting to me is in meetings where people were having organization or organizing events. And again, oftentimes those events were centered around adult rape victims or sexual assault victims. And so I go, well, what if, and then, I would have this conversation about adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Or sometimes I'd be like, well, as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, I can say blah, 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 blah. What was interesting is that what started happening was that instead of me constantly shrinking myself to be in conversations, it required the people around me to accommodate the conversation. And it was very, very different experience. But that's how we become change agents, right? But we ease into that. I didn't wake up one morning and do that. In fact, I remember in 2007 when I knew that that's what I was going to do. I'm going to live openly. I'm not going to live like this anymore. That's how we all come to the healing journey. I'm not going to live, right? So, and so even then, I knew that I didn't know what that meant. It was just a word. Like, I have to figure out what living openly means. Oh, and then when I figured it out, I said, oh, I'm going to tell other people. Oh, I'm going to help people do this, right? And so it becomes its own journey. And so what it does is that the intent was to remove isolation. Because here's the thing about living in secrecy. No one can help you. You can't ask for help. You can't say this bothers me. You can't say I have a trigger. You can't say anything when you live in silence. You remain in isolation. And the worst part is that no one ever gets to challenge all the crappy thoughts that go in your head about what those experiences were. You're left with the violator's interpretation of what happened, right? And so it removes the isolation. When you remove the isolation, you can begin to have dialogue and conversations, and healing can take place more freely than if you're trying to heal in secret. It improves the navigation because you're talking, you're asking questions, and so particularly you're learning language. Anything that we don't talk about, surprisingly, we don't have language for. That was the first thing I realized when I started living openly as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. So I'm gonna live openly. Okay, what's your story? I don't know, because no one had told me that I would need words for this, because my commitment was to live in silence for the rest of my life. So I never developed language for it, right? So you're trying to explain all these things. So when you live openly, then you get to develop language. And once you develop language, then you can navigate your way more smoothly. Of course, you have a positive identity because you get to meet other people who are going through that experience, and you get to identify with something other than just the experience. You get to identify with people. You get to capitalize on resilience because people get to understand what your experience is. And so now we're working from how do we become this resilient, as opposed to how did I get to be this stupid, right? Because when you're not talking to anybody, it's just the voices in your head. It's how did I get to be this stupid? You don't have any information coming in. And then when I work with people, it's real important that we do the each one teach one. So we encourage advocacy, right? Because we're trying to become change agents. We're trying to make the world a better place. The world doesn't need to be a better place for one person. If only you're the only one who changes, we got to be each one teach one. We want masses of people to change, not just one person. So when we instill advocacy work in people, and again, these are invitations. This is not that you must do it this way, because one of the most important aspects is that the healing journey is so individualized. And so we give people invitations into this and that and this. And then we say, here you go, now go and create your own journey from that, right? So that's my living openly model. The next model that I work with now, when I work with people one-on-one, I don't do therapy. I do empowerment sessions with people. So what I work with people with is on empowerment. One of the things that I came to terms with, and this was a challenge for me, was when I finished all of my own therapy, I was no longer hiding. I understood the guilt, the shame. I worked through all of that. There was still, and it took me years to get this piece. I was not much more empowered than I was before I started therapy. Because when I started therapy, I had already learned resilience. I already had a PhD. I already had a black belt. I already had a strong background in religion. So I had already had the markers that told me I was successful, right? And so even in that, even with all of that success, believe it or not, it was really hard for me to come to the point where I understood that I was still living my life extremely small, given my potential. Very small. Success is only what other people see in you. You have to determine for yourself whether or not you are reaching your potential, which is why I'm doing the work that I'm doing now, right? So it's like, where are you living an empowered life? There's nothing inherently empowering about having a PhD. It isn't. You get accolades, but there's nothing empowering about it. You sit in classes like this, you read some books, you write a big report. There's nothing empowering about a big report, right? A big report, right? Right? And so it puts you in situations that maybe get you money, maybe get you reputation, but it does not get you personal power. That stuff comes from within. That's the piece you have to grab from within. When you ask yourself those questions, am I doing what I'm here to do? Am I still living small? Am I living by example, or am I trying to live vicariously through helping other people? Right? So we don't get that until we ask ourselves the big questions. It was years later before I started asking myself the bigger questions as I was really working with other people and seeing what was happening and seeing how where the holes were in the field of behavioral health. Okay. So what I use now, when I work in an empowerment model, I do 8 sessions with people, and what happens after that is individualized. But the first 8 sessions, all I do is work with people on empowerment issues. Now, here's the interesting piece that I figured out. As behavioral health specialists, you will all know, I can have a discussion right now, like what makes a person have personal power? And you will say some of these things or whatever. You know what wellness looks like. But we don't run our sessions like this. We run our sessions with people telling us stuff and more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. Where does the power come in? That was the question I began to ask myself. Okay, where does the power begin to come in? How are you feeling about what it is that you do when you're not in this chair? What is it that you do when you're in your office, when you're in your phone, in your workplaces? What is it that you do? What is it that's happening inside, right? Where's the power coming in? And so what I do is establish a curriculum with them. So for example, we know for sure that people have to know how to self-soothe and manage emotions. If you can't do that, it doesn't really matter how many degrees you have and how many theorists you can cite. If you're not able to instill your own emotional wellness and be at peace with yourself. And so I go over content, I go over emotional defenses. They learn that. So when they sit with me, they're learning, they have a reading, we have a discussion. When we talk about emotional defenses, they insert their lives in the curriculum instead of the other way around. So now we get to it much faster instead of me listening for 8 years about how horrible people's lives have been, right? Or I know like a lot of times even, and you all can probably witness this, when you get the practicum students, they're like, oh, what do I say to the client? When they come in, they sit down, how do you start a session? What do I say? How do I help them? And like we're told, how many people have heard this? You counselors make up 30% of the healing journey, right? That's the 30%. Is that the number we're still using? 30% or less of the healing journey or healing process. We do 30% of the work and clients are supposed to do 70. We're cheating them. Stop cheating your clients. It's 50-50. It's a partnership. Make it a partnership and they'll go faster. I promise you. Give them the other 20%. Give them a curriculum so they know what they come in with. They know, okay, when I leave here, one of the things I have to do in my life is know and understand how to manage my defenses. Well, how do I do that if no one's even taught me what a defense is? What's wrong with telling your clients what a defense is? And then sometimes you feel like, oh, usually what happens when we get to, and this is lesson 1 in my empowerment work. They'll go, oh yeah, I do all that. Oh yeah. And then the question is like, well, do they work? No, they don't work, but I sure use them a lot. Right? Right? But then they begin to see themselves within their own lives as opposed to just telling stories about their life that they don't even know where these stories are supposed to end. Right? No one knows where the story ends. Right? Freud was having people tell stories for 20 years. So he's like, well, it probably shouldn't last that long. Right? But if we give them a curriculum and we say, here's some things, and it doesn't have to be these 8, I'm just saying whatever it is, here's some things we're going to work on, and then you get to insert whatever it is that you need into these things. So when I say that, oh yeah, they're like, oh yeah, I do this, oh yeah, okay, all right, so I should, well, that doesn't work. Well, I always do that when I'm with my husband, but when I'm at work, then I tend to use more of this. But no, none of them work. Okay, well, what would it look like if it worked? And then we apply it to their lives, right? And then we can dig deeper into whatever we need to dig deeper into, as opposed to them coming in and just telling me what happened last week at work or what happened in their family. And it may or may not mean anything at all, right? Because we're just secret keepers. Right? Of course, we deal with attachment, brain preferences. A lot of people don't understand still how much our brains attach to the familiar. That's half of the change. When people get to start and to understand, oh, my brain is just being a brain, it really don't have anything to do with me. Like, this is how brains work, right? And then they get a little bit of space. Suddenly they're not so stupid anymore, right? Like, oh, it's just your brain. Your brain is doing this. And then they go, oh, well, this is how it happens with my brain. And then they ask questions and they insert their lives into all of the curriculum. And so we do that for 8 weeks with stuff. And in 8 weeks, at least they understand, they have a pretty clear idea and understanding of what is working and what isn't working in their lives. Then what we do after that 8 weeks, it depends. My point is that we can have a responsibility for our clients or the people that we help beyond listening. Beyond listening. Because maybe sometimes I think, am I the only one noticed that the world is broken, like the clock stopped working or something. We went back. I don't know what happened, but there's a lot of problems that we're having in our world. Like, the numbers are getting worse. We have more counselors than ever. Everybody has this, but the problems are getting worse. The divorce is getting worse, right? The diagnoses are getting worse. Like, something has to shift. And I want the behavioral health field to be part of that shift. Because what we have right now out there are a whole lot of coaches with no degrees. We have amen section out there. We have a whole lot of advice coming from people who do not know what we know, but they engage more with their clients. They do the 50%. Now, it may not be the 50% that's helpful, but they will never tell a client they're going to give them 30%. They will never tell a client that, right? I'm saying if we have to shift something that we're doing in order to get different results. And so that's the work that I'm really trying to engage in, is getting us to think differently about how we come to support people in their health seeking. Sorry. So those are my two models. Whew. So what does all this mean in terms of what I've been trying to put together over the last decade and how I see things differently unfolding in our field? Having partners rather than providers. So again, 50-50. So oftentimes we see people, well, I provide a service, I'm a healer, and hopefully no one calls themselves a healer here. Another 86, like, right? Had that conversation a couple weeks ago. Right? Like, we're not trying to take power away, we're trying to negotiate space with them, or we're extending to them power, right? And so we're partners with them. We're not just providing them with something. We're not trying to fix people, we're partnering with them. We want to focus on resilience rather than deficit. This is the problem I have with some of those other theories out there. I won't mention, but anyway, right? It's all about what's wrong with you, what's wrong with your brain, what's wrong. Anybody familiar with the Oprah and Perry book that's out now? If you have not, well, when you finish reading your 20 textbooks, when you get a chance over break, you really should listen to what happened to you. It's the new Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry, mostly Bruce Perry. I mean, he's doing the analysis, but it's a super book. But we've got to start looking at people's resilience instead of this deficit model of seeing what it is that we need to fix in people when they come to our office. I'll share this. The first time I went into therapy, I was in my 20s, and nobody needs to heal in their 20s. You just get in and out as fast as you can. So the first time I went in there, though, and this is back in that. All right, it was the 80s. Okay. But I remember because she knew what I needed. She knew I had to deal with the guilt and the shame and blah, blah, blah. And she knew that. And so she was therapizing. Can we even say that word? Say that. Therapizing. Is that a word? Therapizing? I want to make that a word. Therapizing me. She was therapizing me. There it is. There it is. You heard it here first, people. Therapizing me. And so she gave me this back, and there was very little, and she was right that I had the guilt and the shame and all this stuff. She was right about that. Of course she was right about that. Her solution to that was for me to take a bat. And some of you may have been exposed to the bat work, right? You take a bat, you hit it, and you're angry, right? And so I did that, and I would hit it, and I was angry. Here's the thing, here's the interesting thing. Here's why we have to talk to our clients and meet them on their terms and understand their resilience and all this other stuff. She never once, I went to therapy, I had therapy, I quit therapy, never once did I explain to her the bat was not working because who I hated was me. She never asked me that. She never asked me that. It was doing me no good to beat up on him. Here's why. No one had given me permission to be angry with my violator because he was related to me. No one had ever given me permission to be in the state of unforgiveness. Ever. We have to talk and understand people where they are, right? You need forgiveness. No, you need to be understood, right? So that's another piece of imagining, like exploring unforgiveness rather than advocating for forgiveness. And I talk to a lot of adult survivors, because that's the work that I do. I cannot tell you how many of them report to me that their therapists tried to shove forgiveness down their throat. I cannot tell you how common that is. Here's the interesting part about forgiveness, whether you believe in it or not, or wherever it comes from. I do want to say this idea. There's no such word. This is how deep it is. There's no such word as unforgiveness. It's not in a dictionary. I'm gonna make that one. I'm gonna take that one too. I heard it here first. Unforgiveness is officially a word, right? It's a word that specifically applies to people who have experienced trauma and need to understand that it's okay to have feelings about what happened to them, no matter who the violator or perpetrator was. We have to enter into a state of unforgiveness if forgiveness is ever going to